Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do. The podcast that talks about human development and psychology in order to help you figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. And yesterday we were talking about genetics and the patterns and characteristics, incidences and treatments of genetic problems. So we're going to take back up and talk about genetic counseling and testing. Now, genetic counseling is a clinical service that advises couples of their probable risk of having children with hereditary defects. Now, I'm not going to get into the morals on that, but basically, some people want to know if they're going to have a child that's going to have a hereditary defect. And they might choose to not carry that child to term. Some people, might have a problem with that and feel like, they should carry the child to term and give it up for adoption if they don't think they're capable of taking care of the child. But our, orphanages and children who need adopting is just really overwhelming. So some people might choose to just not carry that to term. And that's their choice. The law in most places now with the... I'm not going to get into the politics of this, but in a lot of places now they're saying, no, you cannot. And I don't believe in that because, there are instances when I believe that an abortion is appropriate, such as rape and incest. There was a 12-year-old girl who got raped by a family member and came, to us for counseling and things. Why should that child, who's not even fully developed yet, have to carry that child to term? In my opinion, she should not. If you're willing to have sex and you know how a baby's made, if you're willingly doing that, then yes, you should take responsibility for your actions. But if that was forced upon you and you do not willingly participate in that, then I believe you should have the choice to say, I do not want to carry this. Or in the case of incest, that child could have serious mental and health problems. And so I believe in that case, if you do not want to have that child, that should be allowed as well. I don't want to get into, like I said, the politics and the religion on this because we're talking about psychology. I like to kind of, keep them where they belong. But some people do get the genetic counseling to see whether they are going to want to carry a child to term or not. And in some cases, I think it's a shame that if they know the child is going to have something as, simple as Down syndrome, as common as that they might choose to not do that. Because everyone is different, everyone is unique, and that doesn't doom that child to a lifetime of problems, So again, I'm not on board with all that 100%, behavioral genetics, excuse me, I can't look at things today. The study of relative hereditary and environmental influence. You are programmed a certain way through your DNA. So you're more prone to doing a certain thing based on your genetics. But behavior comes into play there because children learn what they live. So if you're more prone to violence and you see a parent who is violent, it's more likely that you're going to be violent as well. So not only do genetics play a part in this, but the behavior that is modeled for you plays a part in this as well. Like we talked about the kids who watch violent TV. So, the violent television, if you are wired that way and you're seeing that, you're going to act on that more. So that's just a fact. Think about that, if there's some of that going on back in the family, You might want to turn those kids on to something else like PBS rather than some of these hi-ya, and punching and things that they see on some of these shows. In heritability, the statistical estimate of contribution, good gosh, bleh, I'm telling you, don't have a stroke, it sucks, of heredity to individual differences in a specific trait within a given population. So there are things that are heritable, and based on, like we talked about the rolling tongue thing, you might have 4 kids and 1 out of the 4 of them can't do that, but the other 3 can. So certain things are more inheritable than others. And nature and nurture. The influences of heredity and environment. While certain rare physical disorders are virtually 100% inherited, phenotypes for more complex normal traits, such as those having to do with health, intelligence, and personality, are subject to a complex array of hereditary and environmental forces. Let's see how scientists study and explain the influence of heredity and environment and how these two forces work together. So this is where we're starting to get into your development. Studying heredity and environment. One approach to the study of heredity and environment is quantitative. It seeks to measure how much heredity and environment influence particular traits. So trying to figure out, how much does what you got through your genes and what you learned influence you. This is the traditional goal of the science of behavioral genetics. Measuring heritability. Heritability is a statistical estimate of how great a contribution heredity makes toward individual differences in a specific observed trait at a certain time within a given population. So they'll choose what population they're going to work with, and then how heritable is the trait that they're looking at. So they're going to know, is this, like in the instance of the kids again, is this child violent because he inherited that tendency from the parents, or is it because this was modeled for him and so he thinks this behavior is a way to cope with things, or it's okay? Heritability does not refer to the relative influence of heredity and environment in a particular individual. Those influences may be virtually impossible to separate because, like I said, everything that you live through influences you. Nor does heritability tell us how traits develop. It merely indicates the statistical extent to which genes contribute to a trait. And so they've done a lot of studies on this. Family studies go beyond noting similarities in traits among family members. Excuse me, and you might have heard this through some, universities and different places where they do family studies. And they're trying to figure out, what's the dynamics here in this family? Could this be inherited? Could this be a behavioral thing that they're living through, that they learned? So, that's something that they study. Adaptation studies look at similarities between adopted children and their adoptive families, and also between adopted children and their biological families. And then that way they can figure out what is environmental and what is inherited. So, that's something that helps. Studies of twins compare pairs of monozygotic twins and same-sex dizygotic twins. To avoid any confounding effects of gender, monozygotic twins are twice as genetically similar, on average, as dizygotic twins, who, these pages love to stick, these slick little pages, are no more genetically similar than other same-sex siblings. So, genetically speaking, twins would be the most similar people to each other on Earth. So if they both exhibited something, it might be inherited. Also, though, it could be, something that was modeled. But now if you have two twins and one's different, one's got this type of personality, one's got this, and they're in the same environment, that might be a sign that it's something that could be inherited. But again, everybody's different, even twins. So this one might have experienced their life this way, and been treated this way by the parents, and this one might have experienced their life this way and been treated another way by the parents. So even then, we can have differences. So, effects of the prenatal environment. One largely neglected environment influence is what happens in the womb. Because everything that happens in the womb does affect you. Concordant term describing twins who share the same trait or disorder. Concordant personality trait would be like if both twins liked, strawberries, or both twins liked to dance. That's something that they share. Reaction range. Potential variability depending on environmental conditions in the expression of a hereditary trait. So how hereditary and environment work together. Today's researchers in cognitive neuroscience and molecular biology increasingly underlines the complexity of development. Many developmental scientists have come to regard a solely quantitative approach to the study of heredity and environment as simplistic. They see these two forces as fundamentally intertwined and inseparable. So, how you were raised and your genetics are inseparable, because you learn from everything you live through, and you have your own temperament, and each child is different. So, it's hard to, like I say, when I talk about being multi-ethnic and people are like, just be this, that, or, you can't divide yourself into pieces. You are what you are. So you can't chop yourself up in a little piece and say, well, this comes from this comes from this, because it's all affecting you. Everything you've lived through, everything you've inherited affects you in some kind of way. Canalization, limitation on variance of expression of certain inherited characteristics. Now, like I say, you might inherit a tendency to be angry. You might have a temper, but you might also learn how to meditate, or to take, a step back, take deep breaths, go to anger management, and learn how to calm yourself down. So there's a limitation to an inherited trait if you're willing to do the work necessary to change that trait or to lessen that trait in your personality, because that choice is up to you. A birth defect is not up to you, but a personality trait is up to you. You may be more prone to have this personality trait because you inherited it, but you also have the ability to think for yourself, take a step back, and realize, hey, this is a problem in my life. This is affecting my life in some way. So you can take interventions to stop letting this be such a problem in your life. And that's where a lot of people fall short. Genotype-environment interaction, the portion of phenotypic variation that results from the reactions of genetically different individuals to similar environmental conditions. And this is a study that they've done. They studied, the interaction between the environment and, the genetic different conditions in individuals. Many people are exposed to pollen and dust, but people with a genetic predisposition are more likely to develop allergies to these things. So again, there are things you can't control. You can't control if you got allergies. That's just, you gotta take your allergy medicine. That's a fact. Take mine every day. That came from my father's side. They got allergies. So, that's just a fact of life. But again, I can take precautions, to keep that. I have an emergency inhaler, in my purse, so that if I started having an asthmatic bronchitis attack, I can get my inhaler and take care of that. And you can do that with all of yourself, your genetic parts of yourself, your, environmental parts of yourself. You have the control over your life. Genotype-environment correlation. Tendency of certain genetic and environmental influences to reinforce each other. May be passive, reactive, or evocative, or active, also called genotype-environmental oh, good gosh. This is all wrinkly up here. Covariance. Okay, that's a word that makes sense. So, a positive correlation would be parents who provide the genes that predispose a child toward a trait also tend to provide an environment that encourages the development of that trait. For example, a musical parent is likely to create a home to take the child into musical events, and music is heard regularly in the home, and the child might take music lessons. You see how that works there? So that could be, a passive correlation. Reactive or evocative correlations. Children with differing genetic makeups evolve different responses from adults. Excuse me. Parents who are not musically inclined may make a special effort to provide musical experiences to a child who shows interest and ability in music that they might not otherwise provide. And I'm going to tell a story where they came around in our elementary school with musical instruments, and we were allowed to try them and see what we liked. And I like the violin. And you've heard my violin playing if you watch this channel, my channel, not the podcast channel. It's not great. It still kind of sounds like I'm scoring a horror movie. But I wanted to play the violin so badly. The other kids were getting to play musical instruments and things. And so I brought the permission slip that had to be in within a few weeks. And my job was to pick my little brother and sister up at the bus stop. I got off school first. I was to walk. My bus stop was on one side of the neighborhood. Theirs was on the other side of the neighborhood. I was to walk from my bus stop to their bus stop and pick them up and walk them home. Yeah, and I had the key. So at the age of 8 and 9 years old, I was, picking my brother and sister up at the bus stop, walk them home, let them in the house, fix their snack for them. Yeah, that was my job. But I came home one day with a scuff on my new shoes because I was walking to their bus stop, and I was watching a bird fly by, and my shoe hit the curb of the sidewalk. I hadn't stepped up on that one sidewalk yet. My shoe hit the curb and got a scuff on my shoe. And I was told that I could not play the violin because I scuffed my new shoes. Now, years later, I was told it was because they didn't think they could afford the lessons. But imagine me as a child, thinking because I scuffed my new shoe, I could not learn to play the violin. And so you can imagine what that did to my self-esteem, and how I hated myself for being clumsy and scratching my new shoe. So that did me some damage. And then further down the line, my brother was allowed to have guitar lessons, and my little sister was allowed to have flute lessons. They both kind of quit, but that even further made me feel like, well, I'm the one they don't love, they don't care about, because I was not allowed to take these lessons, and yet my brother and sister were. So, that's a little story on how that dynamic can work in families. So if something similar happened to you, that's also going to affect you, isn't it? Active correlations. As children get older and have more freedom to choose their own activities and environments, they actively select or create experiences consistent with their genetic tendencies. And like I said, if you're good at a certain thing, that's the thing you're going to want to pursue, because you're good at it. It comes easy for you and you enjoy doing it. So, that's what I say about people who haven't found out what they want to do yet. If you listen to the wisdom thing about your purpose, that's where you need to start pointing. That's the direction you need to start going in. Like my uncle's bird dogs, they pointed towards the bird. Wherever you're good at, whatever you enjoy doing, that's where you should be concentrating your efforts. What makes siblings different? The non-shared environment. Although children in the same family may bear a striking physical resemblance, siblings can be very different in intellect and especially in personality. One reason may be genetic or temperamental differences, which lead children to need different kinds of stimulation or to respond differently to a similar home environment. A child with a high IQ may be more stimulated by a room full of books and puzzles than a child with a markedly lower IQ. An example of genotype-environment interactions. And I'm not going to touch on that, but I had a room full of books and puzzles and things of that nature, whereas my siblings, not so much. But somehow I was always the one who was a pain in the butt, and they were, the good kids. So don't know how that worked, but excuse me. One child may be more affected by family discord than another. In addition, studies in behavioral genetics suggest that many of the experiences that strongly affect development are different from different children in a family, because different children are treated differently in a family. And usually the oldest child, we're the practice kid. We get the most mistakes made on us. My own parents admitted that to me. Well, we made the most mistakes with you. You were the oldest. We weren't quite sure what to do with you. But at some point, you have to realize that you're treating this child this way, especially when you treat the other children differently, and you don't change the way you're treating this child. Because, you're supposed to learn from your mistakes. I actually shared a little article last night on this. There are parents who choose a scapegoat or a whipping boy, whipping child, whatever, to take their frustrations out on. And that's sad, and that's a shame, and it speaks to their mental health. If one of your children is always getting the brunt of your anger, your frustration, you need to look at that. You need to figure out why that is. Is that because of the child, or is that because of you? Where you feel you fall short, or you feel like you have to take your anger or frustration out on somebody, so it's going to be this person. So that's something you need to look at. And excuse me, parents, you need to do your best to treat all your children equally. When we were little kids, we all got the same toy, whether it be some kind of doll, some kind of truck, we all got the same thing. Because my grandmother said, if you get one for one, they're going to be jealous and things like that. And they were right. Because, at one point there was something I really wanted, that my brother got, and I got something I didn't want. And so I was very jealous of, the stuffed animal he got versus the doll that I got, because I felt like it was just ugly and it wasn't what I wanted. So you have to do your best to treat the children the same, because if you don't, they're gonna, like in my house, that was it. Y'all were all the same. Kid 1, 2, and 3, y'all was all the same. There was no favoritism. Everybody got held to the same standards. Excuse me. If you got in trouble, you got the same punishment. But now at my in-laws' house, that was not true, because, she's a narcissistic sociopath over there. So there were games played with people, favorites. If you do what I tell you to do, then I love on you. And if you don't, then I'm going to hate on you. And it's just, terrible that people like that even have children. I mean, I feel like you should have a psych eval before you have kids. That's just what I'm going to say there. Go to therapy once you turn 18, get all that baggage unpacked, and you need to take child development and child psychology classes before you even have a kid. That's my opinion. That might be a severe opinion, but I think it would do the world a world of good. Niche picking, a tendency of a person, especially after early childhood, to seek out environments compatible with his or her genotype. So, of course, like I said about what you're good at, what you like, you're going to seek out the things that you enjoy and that you're good at, because that's where your interests lie. So, that's the thing. And if your kid starts looking interested in something, encourage that. Don't just be like, oh, I don't want him to do that. No, I let one of my kids go to juggling class. He enjoyed it. He didn't end up going into it much, but he enjoyed it. Anything, little class they want to do, any sport they want to play, I'll let them do it, because that's how you find out what you like and what you're good at. If you keep your children back and don't let them do things they're interested in or want to do, then they're going to grow up and they're not going to know who they are, what they want. And, if they have the presence of mind to start doing these things now that they can, they might find that out. But not everybody has that. So, encourage your children, help your children, let them do things they're interested in and good at. Because if you don't, you're just holding them back, Non-shared environmental effects. The unique environment in which each child grows up, consisting of distinctive influences or influence that affect one child differently than another. So, like I said, if this child's treated this way and this child's treated this way, even though they grew up in the same household, they had very different childhoods. So, if you were the scapegoat or the whipping boy, you do not have this great childhood that this sibling might remember, because they were babied and coddled and treated a different way. So even though you were in the same environment, you were treated differently. So that's why brothers and sisters, sometimes will argue with each other and say, well, you got this, you did this and this and this, because they only see it from their point of view. Everybody sees everything from their point of view. So perspective is everything. You can't see things from my perspective, and I can't see things from your perspective. But we each have our own perspective. And yours is not wrong and mine is not wrong. They're both right. Because this is what happened to me, and this is what happened to you. So brothers and sisters argue sometimes over how they were treated, because one saw things a certain way and the other saw things a certain way. But they're both right, because this is how this one was treated, and that's how this one was treated. So, if you're arguing with your brothers and sisters about who was the favorite, who was the baby, blah, 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 just stop. Because each child was treated in a different way, unless the parent worked really hard to try and make it fair across the board. So, you're both probably right. But, stop finger pointing at each other and saying blah, 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 because you don't know their perspective. You don't know how it felt to be them. And, give each other a break. You grew up in the same household, in the same environment, with the same parents, grandparents, family, etc. So if it wasn't great, you probably know that. You might not know the extent to how that made the other person feel, but you probably know that stuff was not okay in the environment. So you brothers and sisters and, people of all family relations or adopted, just be good to each other. Be good to each other. Because just because your perspectives are different doesn't mean they're wrong. Because they're right. Because they're your perspective. Your perspective can't be wrong. All right. Schizophrenia. Mental disorder marked by loss of contact with reality. Symptoms include hallucinations and delusions. I had a neighbor that suffered from this, and yeah, there were some problems there. Buzz off bug named Jesus. So now we're going to talk about psychopathology. There's evidence for a strong hereditary influence on such conditions as schizophrenia, autism, alcoholism, and depression. We do have some autism, Asperger's spectrum in our family, and I've seen that, evidenced in my kids, and we do have alcoholism that runs in the family. So I told my kids, don't drink to get drunk. Don't do it. We had 2 uncles that died from that. I had a cousin who was a young man, and that's a dang shame, that died this way. So, this is not a game. If it runs in your family, you need to not go that route, and depression. I think a whole lot of people have depression that runs in the family, and there's a lot of people who have depression, they don't even know it. But because of the way they act, other people can usually tell, hey, there's something not right here, especially bipolar. If you're fine and going along dandy, and then one little bump of the road throws you into, oh my God, I'm going to kill myself, and, you're angry and punching. That is a sign that something is not right in your brain, because you shouldn't be able to switch that fast. You should have a little slower fuse than that. So, if you're noticing things like this, you need to step in and take care of yourself. All tend to run in families and show greater concordance between monozygotic twins than between dizygotic twins. However, hereditary alone does not produce such disorders. An inherited tendency can be triggered by environmental factors. So again, if you weren't treated great, you might lean more towards the alcohol or the depression. For example, researchers have linked a gene on chromosome 1 to vulnerability to alcoholism and or depression, depending on the circumstances. Excuse me. So, it's a genetic thing, but also how you're treated can lead you to alcoholism or depression. So that's where we're going to stop today. And I hope that helped you figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. Until next time.